Hello lads, ladies, gents, ladder, whoever, whatever, welcome back to another video. Back in 2005, we were lucky enough to be graced with one of the greatest multiplayer games ever made, Star Wars Battlefront 2. And although there have been plenty of multiplayer shooters since, I would say it's pretty difficult to match what can be considered one of the single greatest tie-in games of all time. Yet, oddly enough, several years later in 2009, Lord of the Rings Conquest basically took the exact formula and applied it to the legendary J.R.R. Tolkien's literary masterpiece. Moving from the vastness of space to the lands of Middle Earth, Pandemic Studios' Lord of the Rings Conquest aimed to recreate all the major battles that you would expect to see. However, in a really nice touch, the game also has an evil campaign, allowing you to see what would happen if Frodo had failed. Sadly, this game is no longer available for purchase other than second-hand, and I played the PC version thanks to my Abandonware, in which there will be a link in the description below if you wish to get the hands on the game yourself. The PC version does have some quirks though, and that might just be on my system, but do be warned. Seemingly the game's lighting would break and the screen would just load up dark, meaning I wasn't able to see anything. However, thankfully I could still pause the game, then I could Alt-Tab out, come back in, and sometimes it would automatically fix or be half fixed, so it'd still be a little bit dim. I would then have to Alt-Tab out again, and then it would be fixed completely. It's a minor inconvenience, but just be warned, you might have this issue happen to you, and it has a very simple fix. With this all said though, let's jump into the game. Lord of the Rings Conquest has two campaigns, and the campaign for the Fellowship is about what you would expect. There are some moments that I wouldn't say are canon, while others seem outright made up, but hey, they fit the overall flow of the game due to its gameplay style. I won't really be talking about the story going forward because it's going to be major spoilers, and even though this is a story that's been out for ever, I think it is something you need to experience for yourself because it is one of those all-time classics. With this said though, most of the game's story is told through cutscenes in between levels. As you might expect, it uses movie footage. Now, since I don't want to get absolutely nuked to hell, I can't really show any of it, but you're not really going to see anything here that you're not going to see in the movies, so just watch the movies, honestly. And even though I do appreciate the use of this movie footage, I do find it to be a little bit lazy because there is a distinct lack of in-game cutscenes. There's nothing here that makes this game stand out from pretty much any other Lord of the Rings game that came out at the time, at least when it came to how this game delivers the story. This laziness also kind of spills into the game's core mission loop, as it pretty much boils down to either defend a spot or capture a flag. Sometimes you will be asked to take out a specific enemy or a certain amount of them, but for the most part the game is relying on its core gameplay to sell you on the game itself. I say that because with how massive the movies are, along with the popularity of the books, there are just better ways to experience the base story. As mentioned, the evil story is nice, but since it's not canon, you don't really need to stress about it. Also, the fact is you have to beat the good campaign first in order to experience it. So it really comes down to the game's presentation and gameplay. Starting out with the presentation, I'll say it's pretty solid overall, with graphics that have aged pretty okay. Some of the text work is clearly from an era where the developers were still getting used to HD textures, but there isn't anything here that I would really complain about. Pretty much all the characters look and feel how they should, and they're animated in a way that is fitting of them. I will say there is a lack of different attack animations between character types, and it does rub me the wrong way. By this, I mean all warriors have the same combos, mages' spells look the same other than a color change, and so on. It feels like they either ran out of time for development, in which case, fair enough, or, as is the issue before, they got lazy. The game's soundtrack is pretty much lifted straight from the movies, and it's incredible as you would expect, as I would say the Lord of the Rings soundtrack is second to none in my opinion, so it makes sense to use it here. As mentioned before, the game's mission structure follows that of something very similar to Star Wars Battlefront 2, and like that game, the way we pick our characters is very similar. We have several different classes to pick from, such as a warrior, archer, mage, scout, and eventually a hero unit that we can unlock after hitting a certain threshold. You'll also get the ability to either control an Ent or a Troll depending on who you're playing as, and although they're super strong, they have a massive weak point, but more on that shortly. Warriors tend to be pretty good against mages, mages tend to beat archers, while archers can beat warriors. Scouts are basically hard counters to heroes as long as you approach them in the right way, since you can do a backstab that will instant kill. However, this is way harder than you might think because if you miss, you're pretty much dead on the spot. Overall, it's a pretty balanced system, and you can change out on the fly as long as you're near one of your team's flags. The game really boils down to range versus melee, but in a nice touch, melee units have a throwable weapon that's on a cooldown. This will help them fight enemies at range, while ranged units do have a very basic melee ability, allowing them to push enemies back so they can get back to fighting at range. Where ranged units do tend to struggle though is against the tanky Ents and Trolls, and although they're definitely capable of dealing them given enough time and space, melee units are able to perform a grapple move allowing them to deal massive damage if not instant kill them. This is that weakness I mentioned mentioned earlier. So if you're playing as either an Ent or a Troll, make sure you're paying attention to what's going on around you because you might get caught out. So at this point you might be thinking, what class do I pick? Maybe I'll go the Archer. I'd have range, 3 different arrow types on top of my regular shot, with there being a poison, multi-arrow, and even a fire/explosive arrow, and if enemies get too close I can kick them away. Well, as mentioned, they do get countered thanks to the mage being able to cast a shield that can block ranged attacks, along with their ranged attacks that they can fire back at you. From a chain lightning attack that can be charged up to do more damage, and an area of effect fireball, they're definitely very dangerous. And if you happen to get close, they do have a ground pound spell that does massive damage while knocking you away. Honestly, their biggest weakness is the fact they're quite squishy. However, they even have a way to deal with that since they can heal themselves and the units around them. So mage sounds like the way to go, right? Well, warriors have a lot more health, and since they don't rely on ranged attacks to do damage, they ignore the shield altogether, meaning that's pretty much useless. And if you're trying to heal those around you, well, warriors can use their special fire abilities on their sword that can hit multiple enemies at once more reliably than pretty much any other class. They can also combo you to death in a 1v1. Each of the 3 main classes that I've talked about so far have some limited crowd control for basic mobs, but I would say the warrior is definitely the best. Well, what about the scout? We haven't really talked about him. I did mention that they hard counter heroes, but what about their dynamic on the battlefield? Well, the fun thing is they counter everybody and are countered by everybody. Although, yes, they can take pretty much anything out in a single hit thanks to their backstab ability, they also are extremely squishy and die pretty much immediately if they do get hit. The reason I really bring this up is because this game is just really fun because it doesn't matter what class you go, you can do some devastating damage on the battlefield. There is nothing more satisfying than being able to beat what should have countered you. I will say this balance doesn't really matter for the campaign itself, but the game does suggest what might be best for that specific mission, which is a really nice touch. Outside of the campaign, there are 3 other real game modes, with there being Team Deathmatch, which is what you would expect, Conquest, which is a capture the point mode, and Capture the Ring, which is pretty much just capture the flag. And even though these are basically the bare minimum you would expect in this type of game, they're still a lot of fun. And honestly, this game has been an absolute blast to revisit. It makes me remember why I loved it so much when I played it initially, and why I still like it to this day. It's not what I would consider to be the ultimate Lord of the Rings experience, but it is what I would consider to be one of the most fun multiplayer experiences I've ever had. I think given how multiplayer focused a lot of games are these days, Lord of the Rings Conquest is primed for a return. I know we're probably never going to see it, but hey, I would love to see a remake, reboot, or just a reimagining of this game. Just not by EA, because they killed Battlefront. So with that, lads, ladies, gents, ladettes, whoever, whatever, it brings us to the end of another video. I hope you enjoyed this dive into Lord of the Rings Conquest. This is one of my all-time favorite multiplayer games, and even though I'm not much of a multiplayer type person, this is one of the few games I always made an exception for. If you enjoyed the video, please consider hitting that like button. If you want to go that extra step, you can hit the subscribe button. And if you want to go that extra mile, you can support me on Ko-fi, Patreon, or YouTube memberships like these lovely people here. And with that said, I will see you guys in the next one. Stay safe out there. Bye.